Welcome, you can rest now. Let your breath settle, your shoulders drop. Let your thoughts soften. You're like falling dust. Tonight, we travel far from the roads of noise, away from cities, dynasties, and the gilded halls of emperors. We leave behind the poetry of scholars, the battles of generals, and the names etched in marble. Instead, we drift toward the wind-beaten edge of the world, to a wall of stone, of silence, and of time itself. This is the Great Wall of China, but not the version you've seen in pictures, not the postcard view, nor the bright stretches crowded with tourists and stories of might. No, this is the wall as it once lived for centuries, lonely, quiet, and seemingly endless. Imagine yourself standing there on a narrow platform of rough stone, worn smooth by generations of boots before yours. To your left, the wall curves out of sight. To your right, it snakes across ridges and disappears into the mist. Above you, the sky is vast and unmoving. Below, the valleys sleep under a blanket of frost. You are not a hero, not a leader, not remembered in poems or carved into records. You are a guard, just one among many. Posted to this tower, this stretch of stone with no promise of return, and it is not for a day, not for a week, but for years. The wind is constant. It whistles through cracks in the stone, rattling old wooden shutters and tugging at your thin robes. It carries the scent of pine, distant smoke, and dry earth. It does not stop. Not in the dry summers, and not in the biting heart of winter. Your duties are simple, but they are endless. Stand, watch, observe the horizon, light a signal if needed, stay alive. Food arrives, sometimes late. Letters from home, rare if they come at all. Conversation, minimal. Hope, depends on the day. And yet you are not truly alone. Others are posted nearby, men just like you. Sometimes you nod in passing at shift change. Sometimes you share bitter tea beside a small brazier. And sometimes you simply sit in silence, side by side, watching the same wind move through the same trees you've seen for 10 winters now. This is the story we tell tonight. Not of the emperor who commanded the wall to grow, nor of the architects who measured its bones, but of those who kept watch. The quiet souls, the forgotten ones, the ones who endured. Their lives were not marked by glory or fame, but by repetition, by patience, by holding the line when no one was watching. So now, as the world around you softens and fades, the tasks, the noise, the screens, let yourself drift to a slower time, a time of longer shadows, of worn boots, wind and stone and silence. Let your mind step onto that wall. Let your breath match the hush of distant snow. Let the quiet wrap around you like an old wool cloak. Because tonight, we walk where they walked. Not in haste, not in glory, but in quiet understanding. This is the rhythm of their world, and for now it becomes yours. Breathe, and let us begin. The day begins before the sun does. There is no alarm, only the wind. It seeps through the cracks in the stone barracks, brushing against your face like a cold whisper. You turn slightly, wrapped in a coarse blanket that holds the faint scent of ash and damp straw. Beneath you, the stone bed is as unforgiving as it was yesterday, and every day before that, it offers no softness, only hardness and a kind of quiet, bitter stability. You blink slowly. The world around you is still dark. The sky outside holds only the faintest trace of dawn, a pale, icy blue that barely distinguishes itself from the wall's own color. The shadows of your fellow guards shift slightly. A cough from the far end of the barracks. The scrape of someone adjusting their boots. No one speaks. The morning does not require words. It demands movement. You're expected to rise. Your limbs ache, as they often do. The cold settles into joints like an old, unwelcome friend. The soles of your feet touch the floor, and immediately you are reminded again that stone does not warm. Not even after all these years. Your boots wait at the edge of your cot. Their leather is cracked. Stiff, but they are still serviceable. You slide them on with practiced patience, flexing your toes to wake them from the numbness. Outside the barracks, the wind is sharper. It cuts rather than brushes. It moves across the exposed tower path with ease, slipping between the bricks, stirring the ashes in the fire pit that didn't burn long enough last night. You pull your wool tunic tighter, the sleeves frayed at the edges, but still warm enough to serve. Over it, a padded vest, the kind worn beneath armor, though today there may be no need for full gear. There usually isn't. The wall stretches around you, a ribbon of stone across a spine of hills. You can't see the end of it. You never have. Some say it stretches thousands of li, farther than any soldier will ever march. But for now, your world is here. This tower, this mile, this morning. Your breath clouds in front of you. Rub your hands together slowly, listening to the quiet sounds of the camp coming awake. A pot clinks as someone checks for leftover tea. A match is struck. Or rather, flint is hit until a spark lights dry grass. The beginnings of warmth? A small flame, reluctant but real. There is a bowl waiting, not yours, not really, but shared. Thick porridge made from millet, sticky and gray. It tastes of nothing, really, except the faint char from the pot. You eat slowly. Not out of enjoyment, but to make the act last. Food is functional here. There is no flavor, only calories. You chew with the knowledge that this bowl might be the most substantial thing you eat today. Beside you, another guard eats in silence. His eyes are tired, older than his face. You nod once and he nods back. That's enough. You've stood watch with him before. You'll do it again. There is a rhythm to mornings on the wall. Not hurried, but steady. It has no variation. The same routine every day. Check your gear, check your post, check the sky, watch the land. You collect your spear, smooth from years of being held but still solid. Its tip is not especially sharp. Most guards never use theirs. You do not expect battle. Not really. But the spear is part of the image. A soldier without a weapon is not a soldier, even if most days the weapon simply leans against the wall like an old walking stick. You walk the parapet now. Stones under your boots, frost melting as the morning light grows. You hear the distant echo of another post clanging its morning bell. A metal bowl struck gently. A signal that the watch has begun. It's ceremonial more than anything. No alarms today. The air is clean here, sharp. It carries the scent of pine and smoke and old dust. You breathe deeply and slowly, letting it settle into your lungs. The silence is vast. Even the wind now seems softer, less like a blade, more like a song. You lean against the cold wall and stare out. There is a valley below, pale brown and covered with brittle grass. Beyond it, low mountains that stretch like tired shoulders under the sky. Nothing moves, no riders, no flags. No smoke columns on the horizon, just stillness. You have watched this same view for years. The seasons color it differently, but the shape remains unchanged. You've memorized it without trying. You know where the deer sometimes pass through in the spring. You know which ridge holds shadow until midday. You know how far sound travels when it snows. And yet you watch it again and again. Because that is the job. Not to fight, not to speak, but to see. To be a pair of eyes the Empire can trust. Your stomach tightens slightly. Not from hunger exactly, but from the knowledge that what you ate will not last long. You shift your weight to the other foot, Your boots creak. The wind shifts again, tugging at your collar. Somewhere behind you, a younger guard laughs at something whispered. The sound carries quickly, then disappears. You do not turn. Instead, you touch the edge of your spear. You count the clouds above the mountains. You wait. Because on the wall, that is the beginning of every day, you wake too cold. You eat what you're given, and you stand. Until it is time to sleep. Or until someone tells you to move. Or until something appears on the horizon. And most days, none of those things happen. There is a rhythm to it now. Not elegant, not sacred, but practiced, quietly embedded in the bones. After breakfast, such as it was, the routine continues. You return to the barracks not because there is anything there to look forward to, but because duty demands it. The morning is not a time of action. It is a time of preparation. Slowly, deliberately, you begin the process of getting ready. Your tunic, still stiff from yesterday's sweat, slips over your head with a faint resistance. The fabric is wool, coarse, scratchy, and forever carrying the ghost of the last fire it was near. It doesn't itch as much as it used to, or maybe your skin has simply stopped noticing. The same goes for the undertrousers. Everything worn long enough becomes background, even discomfort. Next comes the padded vest. Thicker, denser, filled with layers of rough cloth sewn tightly together. Its purpose is to blunt, not stop. A blow. It's more a suggestion of protection than a promise. The vest smells faintly of mildew and body. It is heavy, but not unfamiliar. You've shrugged into it every day for months, maybe years. Then, the armor. Lacquered lamellar plates, strips of leather or iron depending on supply, laced together with cords and bound around the chest and shoulders. It creaks as you move, the lacquer cracked from time and use. It's not new, not polished. It doesn't gleam like the kind worn in court paintings or ceremonial parades. This armor has seen rain, wind, and silence. It is armor made not for heroics, but for waiting. You fasten the ties slowly, your fingers moving by habit. Each knot has been tied and retied so many times, your hands know them better than your thoughts. One at the shoulder, another at the side. Tug, pull, tighten. Not too tight, not too loose. Just enough to remind your body that it belongs to the wall now. Your boots, already worn, are laced again. The leather resists in places, softened in others. You wonder how many guards wore these before you, or maybe these have always been yours. Time blurs the difference. The left boot's heel is uneven, making your steps slightly off. You notice it only in the mornings. By afternoon, the ache in your knees replaces the thought. There's a belt. On it, your sword. If it can truly be called that, the blade is short, straight, more decorative than deadly. You draw it once, inspecting the edge out of habit. It glints dully. You haven't used it in months. You've never drawn it in anger. Most likely you never will. But still, it's worn each day. Because a guard without a weapon is a worker. A man with a blade, even a blunt one, is part of the wall. There are other items you carry. A water flask, usually filled from the communal cistern. A small cloth pouch for dry rations, often empty. A token from home. A stone, smoothed and rounded, rubbed between your fingers when the hours stretch too long. It's not standard issue, but silently tolerated. Once dressed, you perform what must be done. Your post awaits. Always the same section. Always the same steps. From the barracks down the short slope, then up the laddered stairs of your assigned tower. Your feet know every creak, Every crack in the path, you no longer look down as you walk. The steps have imprinted themselves on the soles of your memory. At the top, the parapet, narrow with just enough room to walk two abreast, though most do so alone. The stone is darkened by frost, smoothed by time. You place your spear in its usual spot, leaning it against the wall at a slight angle, just enough to grab quickly should something ever happen. It never does. A superior, usually half asleep and wrapped in a better coat, walks by with the morning list. He mutters your name, checks a wooden tally board, and nods. No ceremony, no conversation, just acknowledgement that, once again, you are present. Still here. Still performing the ritual of readiness. The sun is higher now, but weak. Its warmth doesn't quite reach you. You pull your scarf up over your chin and tighten your gloves. Somewhere below, a supply mule brays. Distant hammering echoes from a nearby post, maybe from guards fixing a roof tile or patching a broken step. Life on the wall is repair more than construction. Maintenance, not innovation. The hours stretch before you, long, open, mostly empty. Your task is to watch, to wait, and to endure. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, peer out at the hills, scan the familiar ridgelines. Look for what isn't there, again and again. These are the rituals of readiness. Dress not to fight, but to be seen, to be prepared just in case. The empire depends on thousands, like you doing the same thing at the same hour. On every tower, invisible lines of defense stretched across mountains, deserts, and forests. No one rewards preparation. No medals are given for uneventful mornings. But still, the ritual continues, because not being ready, even once, might be the only time it matters. So each day you pull the armor tight, lace the boots, fasten the belt, pick up the spear, climb the steps, and look out into the distance. Not because anything is there, but because it might be. The wind brushes your face again. The armor creaks softly as you shift, and the repetition comes comfort, not excitement, not pride. Just the steady presence of duty, worn like your armor, weathered, familiar, and always close. And so, the watch begins. You take your place on the platform, stretch of worn stone, wide enough for two, though most guards walk it alone. The wall beneath your boots has stood for generations, longer than any name you remember, longer than the kingdom you serve, even longer than some of the hills it crosses. And still, it waits, just as you do. There is no formal signal, no trumpet or drum. Your shift begins when the sun tells you, or the man before you nods and steps down without a word. You trade places with him like shadows crossing paths, brief, unspoken, necessary. You place your hand on the cold edge of the wall, smoother than you expect. Wind has worn it down. So have fingers resting there through the hours, years, lifetimes. Race your stance, brace your spear against your shoulder, and begin the first of many slow, quiet glances over the horizon. You do not sit. Sitting is not permitted during watch. It's not unless your legs fail or frostbite sets in. And even then, it's frowned upon. A sitting guard is a tired guard. And a tired guard might not see what needs to be seen. The stretch of wall you oversee today is the same one you oversaw yesterday and the day before. From your post, the land spreads wide, dry hills, patches of stubborn pine, and soil that seems too thin to grow anything meaningful. Farther still, the hills turn to mountains, and the mountains to a haze of soft blue where the world stops trying to be visible. Sometimes there are clouds that hover low, drifting lazily above the peaks. Sometimes a hawk passes overhead. Rarely, A rider, usually a courier from another garrison, arriving with messages wrapped in red thread and sealed with wax. These are the exceptions. Most of the time, the view is still. It's not peaceful. Still a different thing entirely. You are meant to scan the ridgelines. Look for anything unusual. Movement, smoke, shapes that don't belong. The problem is, after the first year, everything looks unusual and everything looks the same. The wind stirs grass into patterns that look like riders. Shadows from passing clouds mimic columns of men. Your eyes learn to second-guess your own mind. Still, you watch. That is the job. Stand. Look. Wait. Don't fall asleep. Don't freeze. Don't think too hard. And the hours pass. Sometimes it is 6 hours on the wall. Sometimes more. Shifts are rotated, but schedules are loose. Depends on how many men are healthy, how many are injured, how many have disappeared. No one tells you how long it will be. You simply remain until you're replaced, or until someone calls your name from the base of the stairs. The longer you stand, the quieter your thoughts become. In the early days, your mind raced during the watch. Thoughts of home, of what you left behind, of what you hoped might come after this post. Over time, that chatter slows. Now your thoughts are like the sky. Broad, slow-moving, mostly empty. You begin to measure time differently, not in minutes or hours, but in light. The arc of the sun from left to right, the way shadows lengthen behind the rocks below. The moment a bird lands, then takes flight again. These are your clocks now. Silence becomes its own kind of sound. There's the wind always, rustling against the folds of your tunic, pressing against your face. There's the faint scraping of boots when you shift weight. The creak of leather at the joints of your armor. The occasional clang of a lantern chain against stone. When the wind catches it just so, someone coughs at the far end of the wall, you hear it. If a mule brays below in the courtyard, it echoes. Some guards hum under their breath. A few mutter poetry they remember from childhood. Others whisper to themselves just to break the feeling of being swallowed by the view. You simply breathe, long, slow breaths, like the stone itself. There are rules to watching. Keep your eyes moving. Don't let them settle too long on one point. Move your gaze like the sun moves across the sky, steadily, inevitably. The longer you look, the easier it is to forget what you're looking for. And in the back of your mind, always, the Mongols. Or some other tribe. Perhaps raiders, nomads, men who know how to ride silently and vanish into the hills before a signal fire can be lit, you're told. You're out there somewhere, maybe. But the truth is, you've never seen them. Most guards don't. Most never will. The real enemy here isn't a man on a horse. It's the waiting. The dull ache in your lower back. The cold that climbs up through the soles of your boots. The fog that settles into your mind after staring at the same hill for 3 hours without blinking. And yet this is the task. Watch and wait. Eventually your fingers go numb despite your gloves. You flex them slowly, trying not to make it obvious. There's no shame in being cold, but there is shame in failing your post. So you keep your posture straight, your eyes steady, your hands resting lightly on the shaft of your spear. Time stretches. It doesn't pass. It just extends, like the wall itself. Somewhere below, a dog barks. Probably chasing a cart or bothering one of the cooks. It's a small moment, but it breaks the monotony. You find yourself listening longer than needed, hoping perhaps that something else might follow, but it doesn't. Just the wind, again. You shift your feet slightly. The wall beneath them does not care. It has seen generations of guards, will see generations more. You are just one more pair of eyes, one more name no one will remember, staring out into a silence that never ends. Still you stand. Still you watch, because that is what you were sent here to do. The body needs food. Even on the wall, where everything else feels optional, comfort, conversation, even warmth, food is still required, not celebrated, not enjoyed, just consumed. The midday meal, if it can be called that, is not marked by a bell or a gathering. There is no mess hall, no long table, no laughter or cheer. There is simply a window of time, a pause, a moment between watch shifts, between duties, when one might, if fortunate, sit with a bowl of something and eat. Meals on the wall are what they need to be. Functional. No more. You eat to keep moving, to keep watching, to keep surviving the cold. Taste is not part of the transaction. The staples vary depending on what came in the last supply run, or what hasn't spoiled. Often, it is boiled beans. Soft, bland, and chalky, their color somewhere between tan and gray. They fill the stomach, which is their only purpose. Sometimes a portion of dried turnip is added. Tough to chew. A little sweet, mostly not. In the warmer months, if someone has traded well or the supply mules were early, there may be rice. Not often, not much. Rice is for men closer to the cities, closer to command. On the wall, millet is the grain of choice. Boiled into a thick gruel in a blackened pot over a low fire, sticks to everything. Bowl, spoon, teeth, fingers. You eat it anyway. Hold the bowl close with both hands, partly for warmth, partly to keep the wind from stealing your meal before your mouth does. You crouch near a wall or within the lee of a tower to shield yourself. Eating in the open invites dust, or snow, or unwanted conversation. There are no utensils for most. A pair of splintered chopsticks, maybe. A carved spoon passed between guards, or your hands when necessary. The food doesn't require finesse, barely requires chewing. Tea, if you're lucky, comes next. Usually cold, bitter, more water than flavor. Made from old leaves reused far too many times. But it warms the throat. And when you're on the wall, warmth matters more than taste. Once in a while, a pickle might appear. Preserved radish, sharp and sour. A fragment of preserved duck egg. A rare delicacy passed from one man to another with quiet reverence. You take a bite, not because you're hungry, but because it reminds you of a meal long past. One that might have had laughter, or soft rice, or spice. Supply caravans come when they can. They are not predictable. Weather, terrain, bandits, bureaucracy, any of them might delay a shipment, sometimes by days, sometimes longer. When that happens, the stored rations are stretched thin. A quarter portion becomes a half. Tea is steeped with leaves already used 3 times. Dried meat is sliced thinner, if it's available at all, yet no one panics. Not quite. Hunger here is not new, it is built into the routine. You learn to eat slowly when food is scarce, and even slower when it isn't, to trick the body into thinking something meaningful has happened. Some guards try to grow their own food. Little plots of soil carved into ledges behind the towers. Scallions, beans, sometimes greens, if there's been rain. These mini gardens are modest and fragile, prone to frost, bugs, and boredom. But they offer something important: control. A tiny rebellion against the uncertainty of supply chains. Others forage. In spring, wild garlic. In fall, mushrooms carefully picked and double-checked, because the wrong one turns a cold stomach into a dying one. In truth, few have the energy for foraging. Most guard towers are placed far from such comforts. Your job is to stand on stone, not wander through woods. There are no meal breaks as such. You eat when your shift ends if you're able. Some eat standing, some crouch, some stare into the bowl as if hoping it might eventually offer more than it does. You don't talk much during meals. There's nothing to say. Everyone's food tastes the same, or lacks taste in the same way. Sometimes a new recruit complains, just once, about the flavor, the lack of it, about how, back home, even the poorest meals had garlic or ginger or sauce. The older guards don't respond. They just chew, slowly, deliberately, the same way they did yesterday. And sometimes, at the edge of a meal, there is a small moment, the clink of two bowls shared under a pale sky, the steam rising in tandem like a quiet salute, a few seconds of warmth, maybe even something like comfort. You finish quickly. There is no lingering. The bowls are rinsed with cold water, not clean exactly, but less dirty. The leftovers, if any, are offered to the dogs or packed away for evening. The fire dies down. The wind returns. The meal is over. It never felt like a feast, but it was enough. Enough to keep going, enough to return to the post, climb the same stairs, to look out over the same hills, and to wait. Because that is what meals are on the wall. Not a celebration, not a joy, but a pause, a breath, a bowl of something. Just warm enough to remember that you are still alive. Loneliness arrives early on the wall. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It seeps into your bones sometime during the first long watch shift, or the second, or the 20th. It's not just the physical distance from home, though that plays a part. It's the way time feels slower here. The way the silence presses in. The way the wind speaks more often than people do. You don't talk much. No one does. Not because you dislike the other men, not because there's animosity or tension, but because there's little to say. The days repeat. The weather changes. The meals don't. You all know what the view looks like. You all feel the same calluses forming in the same places. You all hear the same wind, at the same hour, curling through the same cracks in the same stone. Speech in this place feels unnecessary, even wasteful. Why use words to describe a day that everyone else already lived? But still, there is a kind of connection, a nod exchanged during a shift change, a shared pot of tea passed slowly from hand to hand, the clink of bowls at midday. These small rituals are not nothing. In fact, they are everything. You come to know the men not by what they say, but by how they walk. The way one always clears his throat before climbing the tower stairs. The way another carries his spear low, dragging its end just slightly. You learn to recognize their silhouettes before you see their faces. Some you trust more than others, not because they've proven anything dramatic, but because of how reliably they show up. A man who stands his full shift without complaint earns quiet respect. A man who splits his last turnip without being asked is remembered longer than the ones who boast of past glories. You begin to understand that companionship here is built not on conversation, but on endurance. Not on stories, but on presence. There is a young guard posted 2 towers down, barely old enough to grow a full beard. He still hums sometimes when he walks the parapet, a tune you don't recognize. He's eager. It's not foolish, just not yet worn down. You don't speak often, but you've shared dried fruit once. A rare thing. Think of him during storms, wondering if his post leaks as much as yours. Another guard is older, gray in his beard, slower in his step. He sharpens his blade every evening, though he hasn't used it in years. You've never seen him smile, but when your boot tore weeks ago, he stitched it back without comment. You've left him an extra tea ration the next day. Neither of you mentioned it. This is how it works here. Quiet exchanges. Unspoken thanks. Gestures that replace language. A man hands you his last piece of bean cake without meeting your eyes. You refill his canteen when he sleeps. Nothing is said. Everything is understood. At night, when the watch ends and the wind slips into its colder voice, you sometimes sit together near the embers of a dying fire. No stories, just the shared closeness of bodies that have stood through the same storms. A cracked pot of tea sits between you, steaming faintly. You sip in silence. Occasionally someone mutters a thought, a memory of home or a strange dream or a joke too dry to laugh at. It doesn't matter. The presence is the point, not the words. Loneliness never fully leaves. Even among others, there's a part of you that remains apart, tucked away, reserved. But it dulls with time. It becomes something manageable, like a dull ache in an old injury. You stop resenting it. You simply live with it. And slowly, a new feeling grows. Not exactly friendship, not quite family. Something else, a solidarity. A knowledge that these men, silent though they are your world now. You all exist on this long stretch of stone, on this thread pulled tight across hills and centuries. You stand because they do. They stand because you do. The wall is your border, not just against enemies, but between the life you had and the life you now live. When within that border, you are not truly alone. In a place where time forgets you, where the world below moves on without your name, form quiet bonds that don't need remembering to matter. No letters, no songs, no farewells, just men. Standing beside men, in the cold, in the silence. On the edge of the known, and in that silence, you find something strange. Not joy, not peace, but something steady, something that lasts. The sun slips behind the hills without ceremony. There is no applause for its exit, only a slow dimming of color, a quiet hush settling over stone. Shadows grow long, then blur into one another. The sky fades from pale gold to washed out violet, then into deepening shades of blue. You watch this happen not because it's beautiful, though sometimes it is, but because it marks a change. The end of the day, the beginning of the watch. Night on the wall is a different kind of silence. During the day, there is noise if you listen. Clinks of armor, the scratch of boots, murmured voices near the fire. But after dark, those sounds fall away. The wind becomes the only companion that never sleeps. Its voice deepens, cooler now, more deliberate. It no longer whistles. It hums, low and constant, like breath through a hollow reed. You dress again, a thicker coat layered over your armor. Fur-lined gloves, if you're lucky enough to still have both. A scarf wrapped tightly to guard against the air that bites as it moves. The cold is not sudden. It creeps. It curls around your ankles first. Finds the gaps in your sleeves. Settles in your knees, your knuckles, the back of your neck. The path to your post feels longer in the dark. You know every step, but your eyes search them anyway. Your lantern swings gently from your hand, casting weak light over stone. It glows with a dull orange flame, fed by oil that smells faintly of smoke and resin. Not bright enough to see far, but enough to see where to place your feet. Enough to remind the world that you are here. You reach the parapet. The same post, same wall. But at night it feels like another world. Below, the valleys vanish. The hills become vague shapes, barely darker than the sky behind them. You strain your eyes against the black, looking for motion, for glimmers, for anything that doesn't belong. Sometimes you think you see something, a flicker far off, a suggestion of fire. on red one on we some foot on one pie you on off my mama I'm dumb I some or your own breath clouding your sight. Above you, bats flit soundlessly across the stars. You don't hear them, only feel the small shift of air as they pass. Below, in the ravines and dry gullies, owls speak to one another. Short, soft calls that echo strangely against rock. The wall absorbs sound differently at night. Each step you take echoes more clearly. The shift of leather against leather is louder. Even your own breathing becomes something to be aware of. A fog in the cold, a rhythm in the quiet. Your eyes adapt slowly. You begin to recognize the silhouettes of the towers ahead. You spot the faint lights of other lanterns, swaying gently in the hands of men just like you. Far away, but not too far. Close enough to know you're not alone. Distant enough to feel that you are. You wonder, not aloud of course, whether anyone is watching you from the dark. Not ghosts, though such stories exist. Not spirits, though you've heard the older men mutter about them after midnight. No, you wonder about eyes, human ones, from the other side of the hills. Mongol scouts, perhaps, or travelers, or no one at all. The darkness plays tricks. A stone out of place becomes a crouching figure. A wind-shifted branch becomes a spear. You learn not to trust the first glance. You breathe, steady and slow, and wait for the mind to settle. Then look again. Usually, there's nothing. Still, somewhere out there someone could be watching back. And so, you watch. Shifts are colder at night. But longer too, it seems. Time does not pass in minutes, but in degrees. You don't look at the stars to measure hours. You count the way your fingers lose feeling, the way your shoulders tighten, the way your thoughts grow slower, heavier, like the flame of your lantern before it flickers out. There are no songs here, no chants, no campfire tales. It's only footsteps, soft and regular paced to stay warm. You walk the length of your section. 20 steps, turn, 20 back. Turn again. You don't count consciously, you just know. If you're lucky, the clouds stay high and the stars are visible. If not, the fog rolls in and the lantern light becomes a blur of orange swallowed in gray. That S when it S hardest, when even the light can hold the dark at bay. Sometimes you pass another guard. You don't speak, you nod. He nods. Maybe a quiet, still nothing. Maybe not even that. There is comfort in his presence, in knowing someone else feels the same cold, sees the same shadows, hears the same distant owl. You check the oil in your lantern. Just enough for another hour. Maybe two. You cradle it close, shielding the flame from the wind. Its warmth is small, but it matters. A tiny defiance against the night. Always the wall stretches beside you, solid, indifferent, eternal. It doesn't care that you're tired, that your toes ache, that your hands tremble. It expects only this, that you stand your watch. And you do. Because this is the rhythm of the wall. Not glory, not battle, but presence, repetition, the quiet dignity of doing what needs to be done, even when no one sees. Somewhere below, a branch cracks, a fox, a falling stone. You tense briefly, then nothing, just the wind. Eventually, another lantern approaches. The changing of the guard. No words, just a handoff, a glance, a moment of shared cold. You step down the stone stairs, each one feeling harder than the last. Your breath fogs ahead of you. Your fingers curl in toward warmth. And behind you, the next man takes his place. His watch begins. Yours ends, but the darkness remains. The wind remains. The wall remains. Out there always. The night watch is back. The days are long. But the years, they're something else entirely. You don't remember the exact number anymore. You stopped counting a while back. Maybe after the third winter, or the fifth. You used to scratch a line into the inside of your belt for every full moon. But the leather grew crowded. The lines grew faint. Eventually you forgot to mark one, then another. And then you simply stopped. Some guards are posted for a season, others for a year or two. But many far more than you'd expect. Stay longer. Some because they're ordered to. Others because they have no place to return to. And some because, after a while, the wall is the only home they recognize. It's strange what time does to memory. You used to dream of glory, battle, of being noticed. You imagined one day you'd be called back to the capital, summoned by a high-ranking general who had read of your dedication. Maybe you'd be rewarded with land, or promotion, or simply a clean uniform and softer boots. But the years were those dreams thin, not all at once, slowly like water against stone. What was once a fire becomes an ember, and then ash. Now, your hopes are smaller, quieter. You dream of finishing the week, of surviving the next snow, finding an extra portion of pickled radish at the bottom of a ration sack. Sometimes you just dream of sleeping through the night without waking from the cold. You think of home, but even that becomes harder. The faces begin to blur, the details shift. Your mother's hair, was it tied in a braid or loose at her shoulders? Did your brother walk with a limp, or was that someone else from your village? Was your father's voice deep? You think it was, but you're not sure anymore. Letters come, sometimes. A scroll tied with string, passed down from garrison to outpost to tower. Often, the paper is stained by the weather. The ink faded. The words hurried. Still, you read it slowly, twice, 3 times. Every word becomes a memory, even if it doesn't make full sense. You keep them tucked inside your bedding, scrap of another life, something to reread on quiet nights when the stars are too bright and sleep feels too far away. But more often, there are no letters. No word from the world below. Time doesn't just pass on the wall, it passes without you. Festivals come and go. Children grow taller. Fields are planted and harvested and planted again. And you are still here, on stone, with the same boots, the same view. Some guards tell stories at night, half-remembered tales from their childhood villages, or legends passed down from older soldiers. There's one about a ghost that walks the wall at dusk, looking for a son who never returned. Another about a tower that disappeared during a snowstorm and was never found again. You don't believe them, but you listen anyway. The stories become a kind of company. The only voices that echo longer than a season. You carry them in your head, whisper them to yourself on long shifts, sometimes altering the endings as you go. Not to lie, just to find something new in the familiar. There are those who dream not of returning home, but of being remembered, of doing something noteworthy. Lighting the signal fire first, spotting the distant rider, writing a poem that others carry. But the wall is long, and memory is short. The names fade faster than the stone wears. Most of the time, when someone leaves through death, through illness, or by the rare blessing of discharge, they are replaced quietly. A new man arrives. He takes the same post, uses the same bowl, sleeps in the same cot. Nothing changes. The wall absorbs them all, and so you adjust. Your dreams become smaller, more immediate. You hope for dry socks, for no blisters, for an uneventful patrol. For a moment when the sun comes out just long enough to thaw your hands, but still, sometimes when the wind quiets, and the stars sit low in the sky like lanterns hung by forgotten gods, your mind drifts back to a rice field. A woman's laugh is the weight of a child's hand in your own. You don't know if it was real, if it still is, if it ever was. But you remember it. And for a moment, that's enough. Because dreams, even faded ones, are what keep you standing on this wall, not orders, not duty, not pride. Just the soft echo of something that once mattered, still flickering inside your chest like a hidden coal. Faint, but warm, and so you keep going. One more watch, one more week, one more winter. Maybe one day the wall forgets your name. But you remember who you were, even if only in dreams. His name doesn't matter, or rather, it did matter. Once. Back when he was still home. Back when his name was spoken each evening across a low wooden table, passed between mother and son, brother and friend, like warm rice in a shared bowl. But by the time he reached the wall, that name had begun to feel distant, like a word worn smooth from too much handling. He was born in the southern plains, in a farming village too small to appear on most maps. It's a kind of place known by its crops rather than its name. His family grew rice, not much of it, just enough. A small patch of land, leased from a landlord who visited once a season, took his share and left without lingering. The soil was familiar, hard in the dry season, it's heavy in the wet. His days were spent with feet sunk in water, back bent beneath sun. He had a younger brother, a curious bright-eyed shadow who followed him through fields, through forest paths, to the market and back. They shared everything: meals, straw mats, beatings, laughter, even boots that were too big for one and too small for the other. His parents hoped the younger would become a scholar. As the elder, the one we follow now, was always expected to endure. The draft came during spring. A government official with crisp robes and a waxed mustache arrived with scrolls and a list. The village offered no resistance. It never did. A quota was required, and names were chosen. Some volunteered, hoping to earn coin or land. Others were assigned quietly, with nods and bowed heads. He didn't resist. He didn't cry. He simply listened as the official pointed to him. "Strong," the man said. "He'll last." Then the orders were written, the seal pressed, the fate sealed. His mother packed him dried radish and 3 steamed buns. His father offered an awkward embrace, more like a pat on the shoulder. His brother handed him a small cloth doll, a makeshift talisman stitched from worn clothes with bits of straw for arms. For luck, the younger said. They didn't know where he was going, only that he was going away. The journey north was long, longer than he expected. He'd never traveled far from the village, never needed to. But now, with a group of other drafted peasants, he marched. Past fields and towns, over rivers crossed by rope bridges, through mountain passes, where wind cut through their thin coats. They were led by a soldier who did not smile and who rarely stopped. The boots they were given blistered their feet. The rations were stale. The beds, when there were any, were floors in overcrowded inns or stable corners that smelled of dung. But they kept walking, because that was what they were told to do. As they went farther north, the language shifted. Accents grew unfamiliar. The air grew thinner. The land turned rugged. Less rice, more rock. Trees changed shape. So did the food. He missed the simple broth his mother made. Hot, thin, but spiced just enough to feel like love. Here, meals were gruel and salted meat. Sometimes just hard bread and cold water. Eventually, after many weeks, they reached it. The wall. It wasn't what he expected. It's not a towering monument, not a gleaming structure of grandeur. No, this part of the wall was rough, unfinished. The stones were coarse and uncut. Wooden scaffolding clung to the sides like a spider's web. Smoke from distant cook fires rose in thin columns. It smelled of sweat, dust, and soot. This was not a destination. It was a job site. They weren't soldiers yet. Not really. First they were builders. It was a wall they were told would never build itself. And so, day after day, they carried stone, hauled bricks, mixed earth with water, and tamped it into molds. The labor was slow, the tools dull. Their hands blistered, their backs ached. But no one complained loudly. Complaining didn't shorten the hours, but didn't ease the load. At night, they collapsed on straw mats and half-finished towers. Fires were lit when there was fuel. Often there wasn't. They used their own breath to warm their fingers. The wind slipped through unfinished mortar joints. The blankets, if they had any, were shared. He thought often of home, of the little clay oven in the corner of their hut, of his brother's questions, always questions, of his mother's hands wringing a cloth as she watched the rain. But those memories grew more distant with each stone he stacked. Each day he went without hearing his own name spoken aloud. The other workers changed over time. Some left, some fell ill, some simply disappeared. New faces came. He stayed, because orders said so, because he had nowhere else to go. Because over time, the rhythm of lifting and placing and lifting again became familiar. Not easy, just known. The wall grew taller, and so did he. Not in height, but in hardness. His shoulders broadened. His hands became leather. His eyes narrowed from squinting against dust and glare. He stopped asking when it would end. He simply woke, worked, and waited. Eventually, a commander approached and said, "He's ready. Move him to sentry rotation." Just like that, no ceremony, no celebration. His laboring days were done. Now he would watch. The boots stayed the same. The food stayed the same. But now, instead of stone on his back, he had a spear in his hand. Instead of carrying the wall, he stood upon it. The view was wide, empty, beautiful in a way he didn't expect, but also quiet and cold. From rice field to laborer, from laborer to guard, drafted, not chosen, and now one name among thousands. Man no one remembers, but the stone beneath his feet remembers. It always does. Before he ever stood guard, he built, not because he wanted to, not because he trained for it, but because someone had to. And orders like stones were passed down from above, heavy, impersonal, unmoved by protest. The wall didn't rise by magic. It rose by muscle, by repetition, by the aching backs of thousands of hands and feet that will never be named in history. He was one of them, a builder. Drafted, marched, and deposited at a half-finished outpost somewhere in the north. A place where the wall didn't tower. It crawled slowly, brick by miserable brick. The mornings came early. They always did. Not with songbirds or golden light, just with cold or heat, or dust in the mouth before the first word was spoken. He woke stiff, every joint a quiet complaint. The bedding was straw, when there was any. Most nights it felt like sleeping inside a crumbling sack of flour. The tools were simple: shovels, baskets, hammers, ropes that frayed, buckets that leaked. They used their hands more than anything, to haul, to scoop, to lift, to bleed. Each morning they walked the short slope to the quarry pit. If it rained the night before, the trail was mud, sucking at boots, trying to keep you there. If it didn't, the dust rose with each step, clinging to skin and throat like a second layer of clothing. Bricks were carved on site, not by craftsmen, but by workers with strong arms and dull chisels. Sometimes the bricks didn't fit quite right. Sometimes they cracked before they were set. No one cared. Time was more important than perfection. The goal wasn't a beautiful wall. It was a long one. He carried bricks on his back, stacked high in a woven basket strapped with rough rope. The cord bit into his shoulders. If he shifted too suddenly, the edge of a stone would jab his spine. Each trip up the slope to the building point took 12 minutes. Down again, 6. Dozens of trips each day. No one counted. No one needed to. When he wasn't carrying, he was digging. Earth had to be moved, flattened, tamped, leveled. The foundation mattered. They told him that once. Mostly they just barked instructions and pointed. His shovel cut into soil that fought back. Clay rock, frost-hardened mud. He dug until the blisters on his palms burst. Then kept digging. Summers were worst in their own way. The sun didn't just shine, it punished. It reflected off stone, beat down from above, soaked into every layer of clothing. His skin burned, peeled, burned again. The sweat never stopped. It mixed with dust to form a paste that clung to his face, his arms, the inside of his collar. There was no shade. Not up here. The trees had long since been cleared for scaffolding and fuel. Sometimes he fashioned a makeshift hat from woven reeds, but the wind often tore it off. He squinted until his vision blurred. Drank water that had sat in sun-warmed jars, and worked. Then came winter. At first he welcomed it. Anything to cool the burning air. But winter was worse. The cold didn't just numb fingers. It found its way into the joints, the spine, the breath. Earth turned to stone. Mud to glass. The bricks became brittle, easier to crack, harder to stack. Tools slipped from frozen hands. Every gust of wind carried sand and pain, wrapped his fingers in cloth that helped. For the first hour, after that, they froze stiff again. Sometimes he worked without feeling anything from the elbow down, watching the movement, trusting the muscles to remember. And still, the building continued. There were no days off, not for frost, not for injury, not even for death. Someone collapsed on the line, they were dragged aside. If they didn't rise by dusk, someone else took their place the next morning, quietly, without question. There was no anger in the work, not really, just routine. You did what you had to do. You watched your feet to avoid stepping wrong. You watched your breath to avoid freezing your lungs. You watched the hands of the man beside you to match the pace to keep moving to survive. Food was brought in at intervals, always late, always bland. Bowls of bean mash, salted turnip, sometimes hot, sometimes not. You ate quickly, standing, before the wind turned the meal to stone, then back to work. Nights were no gentler. After the sun fell, the firewood was rationed. A single pit might serve 8 men. They huddled close, coats pulled over knees, eyes half shut. They didn't talk much. A grunt, a sigh, a scrape of the spoon. That was enough. Words required energy. Energy was for lifting, for hauling, for digging, not for dreaming. Over time, his hands became stone, calluses where blisters used to be, strength where softness once lived. He no longer flinched when the weight shifted wrong. He no longer paused to stretch his back. He simply adjusted, kept moving. They say the wall is a monument, a marvel of human effort. To him, it was a wound that never healed, a mountain that never stopped growing, a path with no end. But still, he helped build it, quietly, thoroughly, stone after stone, until one day, a new order came. He's strong. He's lasted postum as guard. And just like that, the lifting stopped. But the watching, that was just beginning. The day they handed him the spear, no one said congratulations. There was no ceremony, no handshake, no moment of relief. It's just a voice, firm, unfeeling, telling him to report to Tower 37 by sunrise. A new assignment, a different uniform, slightly warmer perhaps, slightly more ceremonial. He was no longer a builder. Now he was a sentinel. They gave him a spear. Long, straight, lacquered black, chipped at the base where someone else had gripped it before. The blade was sharp enough to reflect light, but not to cut well. It didn't need to. The weapon wasn't meant for use. It was meant for posture, for symbolism, for presence. His armor changed too. Gone were the mud-streaked work coats. In their place, padded robes beneath segments of lamellar plating. It creaked when he moved, especially in the cold, but it fit. Mostly his new quarters were inside the tower itself. A cramped square room shared with 3 other guards. Stone walls, thin mats, a single brazier in the corner that smoked more than it warmed. The window was narrow, just wide enough to see the same stretch of horizon he would look upon. Every day, for years to come. He learned the rotation quickly. 2 shifts a day, morning and evening, or evening and night. Hours spent standing, watching, pacing the parapet. The stairs groaned beneath every step. The outer wall was slick in winter, gritty in summer. The view stretched far, but never changed. The first few weeks he paid attention, scanned the trees, tracked clouds, watched for movement on the ridgelines. His grip on the spear was tight, his eyes alert. He thought perhaps this new role would offer meaning, that the silence might sharpen him, that stillness might teach something the hammer could not. But silence, when stretched across seasons, begins to press down. The days bled into one another. The sun rose, the wall warmed, the wind shifted. The same meals came, the same chores, the same nothing on the horizon. He knew the shapes of every rock on the ridge, every tree that stood crooked, every notch in the parapet's stone. And still, he watched them again, and again, and again. The paint on the tower walls, once a bold crimson stripe near the doorway, began to fade. At first from sun, then from time, then from neglect. It flaked slowly like peeling bark. No one repainted it. No one mentioned it. He noticed it one morning, then again a few months later, and then not at all. Other things faded too. His memory of home. For one, not suddenly. Just gradually. As if his mind stopped needing to hold the details. The faces grew vague. His brother's laugh became harder to recall. The smell of steamed buns in the morning, a scent once strong enough to make his stomach ache, now drifted away like smoke from a dying fire. Sometimes he tried to conjure their names, not the names of generals or commanders. Just the people who mattered before. A neighbor, a friend, a cousin. But the names hovered just out of reach. On the edge of thought, then gone. What he remembered more clearly were the rhythms of this new life. The way the wind sounded different before snow. The color of the sky 10 minutes before rain. The creak in the third step of the tower's ladder, the call of the courier's horn echoing in the distance every few weeks, the weight of his armor when soaked, the weight of his own limbs when tired. Other guards came and went, some younger, some already gray. They rotated through the towers, transferred to new posts, fell ill, disappeared. He stayed. He always stayed. He was dependable, predictable, quiet. The kind of man no one worried about. The kind they forgot was still there. Sometimes a commander would pass through on inspection. Look at him. Say, still here? Half joking, half confused, he'd nod. Say nothing. In the summer, the tower baked. Heat rose from the stone like steam from a kiln. He'd drink warm water and squint into the brightness, lips cracked, back damp with sweat. In the winter, it was worse. The cold settled in his bones. His breath froze in midair. His fingers, even gloved, ached with each heartbeat. But he never left the post early, never asked to be reassigned. There was a strange comfort in the sameness, in the way each day followed the one before. No surprises, no changes, just continuation. His spear, once a novelty, became an extension of his arm. It leaned beside him when he sat, rested in the crook of his elbow when he paced. Sometimes he'd find his fingers gripping it in his sleep, out of habit. He kept a small stone in his coat, a river stone, smooth and oval, not from this place. From the stream behind his family's hut, far away. It was the only thing he had carried from the beginning, the only thing that still felt real when everything else had turned distant. Years passed, still he stood watch. The day they handed him the spear, no one said congratulations. There was no ceremony, no handshake, no moment of relief. It's just a voice, firm, unfeeling, telling him to report to Tower 37 by sunrise. A new assignment, a different uniform, slightly warmer perhaps, slightly more ceremonial. He was no longer a builder. Now he was a sentinel. They gave him a spear. Long, straight, lacquered black, chipped at the base where someone else had gripped it before. The blade was sharp enough to reflect light, but not to cut well. It didn't need to. The weapon wasn't meant for use. It was meant for posture, for symbolism, for presence. His armor changed too. Gone were the mud-streaked work coats. In their place, padded robes beneath segments of lamellar plating. It creaked when he moved, especially in the cold, but it fit. Mostly his new quarters were inside the tower itself. A cramped square room shared with 3 other guards. Stone walls, thin mats, a single brazier in the corner that smoked more than it warmed. The window was narrow, just wide enough to see the same stretch of horizon he would look upon. Every day, for years to come, he learned the rotation quickly. 2 shifts a day, morning and evening, or evening and night. Hours spent standing, watching, pacing the parapet. The stairs groaned beneath every step. The outer wall was slick in winter, gritty in summer. The view stretched far, but never changed. The first few weeks, he paid attention. He scanned the trees, tracked clouds, watched for movement on the ridgelines. His grip on the spear was tight, his eyes alert. He thought perhaps this new role would offer meaning, that the silence might sharpen him, that stillness might teach something the hammer could not. But silence, when stretched across seasons, begins to press down. The days bled into one another. The sun rose, the wall warmed, the wind shifted. The same meals came, the same chores, the same nothing on the horizon. He knew the shapes of every rock on the ridge, every tree that stood crooked, every notch in the parapet's stone. And still, he watched them again, and again, and again. The paint on the tower walls, once a bold crimson stripe near the doorway, began to fade. At first from sun, then from time, then from neglect. It flaked slowly like peeling bark. No one repainted it. No one mentioned it. He noticed it one morning, then again a few months later, and then not at all. Other things faded too. His memory of home. For one, not suddenly. Just gradually. As if his mind stopped needing to hold the details. The faces grew vague. His brother's laugh became harder to recall. The smell of steamed buns in the morning, a scent once strong enough to make his stomach ache, now drifted away like smoke from a dying fire. Sometimes he tried to conjure their names, not the names of generals or commanders. Just the people who mattered before. A neighbor, a friend, a cousin. But the names hovered just out of reach. On the edge of thought, then gone. What he remembered more clearly were the rhythms of this new life. The way the wind sounded different before snow. The color of the sky 10 minutes before rain. The creak in the third step of the tower's ladder. The call of the courier's horn, echoing in the distance every few weeks. The weight of his armor when soaked. The weight of his own limbs when tired. Other guards came and went. Some younger, some already gray. They rotated through the towers, transferred to new posts, fell ill, disappeared. He stayed. He always stayed. He was dependable, predictable, quiet. The kind of man no one worried about. It's the kind they forgot was still there. Sometimes a commander would pass through on inspection. Look at him say, "Still here?" Half joking, half confused, he'd nod. Say nothing. In the summer, the tower baked. Heat rose from the stone like steam from a kiln. He'd drink warm water and squint into the brightness, lips cracked, back damp with sweat. In the winter, it was worse. The cold settled in his bones. His breath froze in midair. His fingers, even gloved, ached with each heartbeat. But he never left the post early, never asked to be reassigned. There was a strange comfort in the sameness. In the way each day followed the one before, no surprises, no changes, just continuation. His spear, once a novelty, became an extension of his arm. It leaned beside him when he sat, rested in the crook of his elbow when he paced. Sometimes he'd find his fingers gripping it in his sleep. He kept a small stone in his coat, a river stone, smooth and oval, not from this place. From the stream behind his family's hut, far away. It was the only thing he had carried from the beginning. The only thing that still felt real when everything else had turned distant. Years passed, and still he stood watch. Not out of duty, not out of ambition, but because it was the only thing he knew how to do anymore. The wall didn't ask for greatness. It asked for presence. He gave it that. And in return, it gave him a place to disappear slowly, not vanish, just fade. Like the paint on the tower wall, like the voice of a brother, long silent, like the name of a man. Once spoken, now only remembered by stone. Every now and then, something happens. A rider might appear distant and blurred against the horizon, kicking up a long tail of dust. A courier might arrive breathless, waving a sealed message and speaking too quickly, eyes scanning the surrounding hills. Whispers spread along the wall, quiet at first, then louder. Someone saw movement in the trees or smoke where there should be none. Or a traveler approaching without the proper signal. Tension rises. It always does, briefly. In those moments, the stillness shifts. Men straighten their backs. where hands tighten around spears, while officers sharpen their tone. Oil lanterns are trimmed, rations are packed just in case. You watch the sky more carefully, double-check the placement of signal towers, squint a little longer into the distance. You listen, not to the wind, but to what might be hidden beneath it. And then, nothing. No attack, no enemy. No horseman thundering toward the gates. The suspicious traveler turns out to be a lost merchant with poor directions and a missing permit. The smoke was from a shepherd's fire. The movement, just wind pushing through brittle grass. The courier's message is routine. A supply delay, a shift change, or news from a command post far away. Slowly, the tension fades. Spears are lowered. Packs are unstrapped. Boots resume their regular sluggish pace. A few jokes may be shared, and then it's back to watching. Back to waiting. That's the real truth they don't tell you before you arrive. It's not fear that wears you down, not even hunger or cold. It's the dullness, crushing weight of almost. He had imagined once that serving on the wall would mean danger, that he'd hold the line against raiders, fight for the empire, maybe earn distinction. But instead, the enemy rarely comes, if ever. Instead of battles, there's boredom. Instead of shouts, there's silence. The real test isn't of strength or courage, it's patience. Endurance of the mind. Rumors help pass the time, spread faster than the wind, carried by guards in whispers during night watch or over bland bowls of porridge. Stories of far-off towers under attack, of new weapons being tested in secret, of barbarian armies forming just beyond the mountain pass. Every tale is second-hand. Every source is someone who heard it from someone else. But still, they're told and retold, reshaped with each telling like river stones, smoothed over time. And yet, nothing changes. You keep watch. Your mind begins to play tricks. You think you see movement where there is none. Shadow shifts behind a rock. A glint of light that wasn't there before. Your heart beats faster. For a second, then it slows. And you realize it's only your reflection in the lantern glass, or a bird, or the same rock you've stared at for 6 months, seen from a different angle. Eventually, your body learns not to react. You pace slower, breathe steadier. Keep your hands loose. There's no point in staying tense all the time. The cold is exhausting enough. There's an old guard always polishing his spear. Every day, meticulously, even though it's never been used. Even though it probably never will be. He doesn't talk about it. He just keeps polishing. Maybe it gives him purpose. Or maybe it's just something to do with his hands. Others give up. Let their gear rust. Let their posture sag. What's the use of readiness when there's nothing to be ready for? What's the point of sharpening a weapon that will only collect dust? He finds himself somewhere in the middle. Alert enough not to fail. Detached enough not to hope. And sometimes, he wonders, which is worse, the threat of battle or the endless silence? Because when you're braced for something that never arrives, your thoughts begin to unravel slowly. Not all at once, just thread by thread. You stop dreaming of home. You stop marking the days. You stop expecting a message. And eventually, you stop expecting anything at all. But still, the rumors continue. They cycle through like weather patterns. A general assembling troops in the east. A breach reported in a remote pass. A noble sending his son to inspect the northern towers. None of it affects your life. But you listen, because listening helps pass the hours. Most of the time, the land stays quiet. The hills remain undisturbed. The signal fires never light. The riders never come. So you stand. Watch. Wait. prepared for an invasion that never arrives. And over time, you realize it's not the battle that breaks men. It's the waiting. Time doesn't announce itself here. It doesn't arrive all at once or mark its presence with ceremony. It settles quietly like dust in the corners of a tower. Slow, steady, unnoticed until it's everywhere. He grows old on the wall without realizing it at first. The changes come subtly. A stiffness in the knees that lasts longer after each watch. The way his fingers ache before the cold sets in, not after. The occasional wince when climbing stairs he used to take 2 at a time. The armor, once tight, now feels loose in places. Or maybe it's just him, shrinking in slow degrees. The wall, however, doesn't change. The stones beneath his boots are the same ones he first walked across decades ago. The cracks in the parapet are familiar. So are the lichen patterns growing between bricks. Everything else, the guards, the captains, the seasons, shift and cycle. But the wall stays still, immovable, indifferent. New recruits arrive now, young men, not much older than he was when he first stood in line with calloused hands and a woven pack. They carry nervous eyes, untested strength, and questions they don't dare ask aloud. He watches them, not with judgment, but with the quiet recognition of someone who has already lived their fears. He doesn't lecture. He doesn't command. Instead, he shows them what they need to know. How to wrap cloth around their hands before gripping a spear. How to pace along the parapet without wearing out their boots. Where the wind cuts hardest at night, and which side of the tower offers the best shelter during storms. His teaching is all gesture, slow movements. A nod here, pointed finger there. His voice, once firm and clear, now rasps like dry leaves. He speaks less because he must, and more because words feel heavy now. The wall has taught him that silence can be just as instructive as speech. They call him Lao Bing. Old soldier, sometimes with respect, sometimes with a hint of pity. He doesn't mind. He wears the name like he wears his cloak. Patched, familiar. Not quite warm, but enough. There's a small mirror in his bunk. A polished bronze shard someone gave him years ago. He rarely uses it, but when he does, he sees the difference. The lines around his eyes, the graying stubble. The way his gaze lingers as if trying to remember a face that once lived behind it. Time has etched itself into his skin, but gently, not cruelly, just honestly. The spear he carries is not the one he was first issued. That one splintered long ago. This one is heavier, balanced. It fits his grip now, worn smooth from years of the same hold. Like everything else, it has become an extension of routine, of repetition, of who he has become. The younger men often talk after meals. About home, about women, about things they'll do when their post is over. He listens without intruding. He doesn't tell them that most of them won't return quickly, or that some won't return at all. Doesn't sour their hopes. Just lets them talk, their voices soft against the crackle of fire. Occasionally, one of them will ask, "How long have you been here?" He'll shrug. Long enough, because the truth is, he's lost track, not just of years, but of the reason he's still here. Could have requested transfer, could have returned to the village if it still exists. But after so long, the idea of leaving feels more foreign than staying. The wall is home now. The rhythm of the watch, the weight of the spear, the quiet, all of it feels more real than whatever came before. There is a comfort in his routine, even if it aches. He wakes before dawn, checks his boots, tightens the straps of his armor out of habit, though he no longer marches. He walks the wall before his shift starts, noting which bricks need repair. He greets the cooks, feeds the stray dog that's lived near the tower for 3 winters. He doesn't rush. He doesn't falter. He simply continues. On colder nights, when the fire is low and sleep won't come, he thinks about the beginning, about the rice fields, the voice of his brother, the feel of mud between his toes. Those memories don't come clearly anymore. They arrive like dreams you wake up from too quickly. Flashes of sound, shape, scent, then gone. What remains is here. The wall, the sky, the endless wind, and his post. He is not bitter. There's no anger in him, just weariness. And something quieter than pride. A kind of quiet satisfaction that he has endured. That he has stood his ground. That even after all this time, he is still here, still watching, still part of something greater than himself. Not in glory, but in constancy. And though no statue will bear his name, and no story will be told in his honor, the wall knows him. The stones have felt the weight of his boots longer than most. The parapet remembers the shape of his hand. The cold has learned the contours of his face. He has grown old with the wall, and the wall in its own silent way has grown with him. He writes at night when the tower is quiet and the coals in the brazier burn low, giving off more light than heat. His back leans against the stone wall, knees drawn up, a worn scrap of parchment resting atop his thigh. The ink is faint, thinned with water. The brush is old. The bristles splay a little too much, but it still works, and that's all that matters. He doesn't write often. Maybe once every few months, maybe less. He doesn't keep track anymore. There's no schedule for this, no urgency. Just the slow return of a memory or the ache of a name not spoken aloud in years. That's usually what brings him back to the page. Not duty, not formality, just the need to reach, however feebly, across the distance. He writes to his brother, always to his brother. The letters are never sent, not because he doesn't want to, but because it's been too long, too much time has passed. Too many seasons have turned the rice fields of their childhood into something unrecognizable, if they even exist anymore. He wouldn't know where to send the letter now, wouldn't know who would receive it, if anyone would. Maybe his brother still lives. Maybe he has sons now, strong boys who help in the fields or run barefoot. Through the narrow paths of a village that barely remembers the older sibling who left so many years ago, or maybe the brother moved to the city or married into a merchant's family. And this thought comes quieter. Maybe he's gone too. It's not sadness he feels, writing these words. Not exactly. Something more distant. A softness. It's like walking through fog, where the shapes are familiar, but the details are gone. He remembers the way his brother laughed. Loud, messy, unashamed. He remembers the way they used to race to the riverbank. How the younger always lost, but always claimed he slipped. In the letters, he sometimes describes the wall. Not all of it, just pieces. The way the wind sounds different in winter. The way the stars align perfectly above the southern ridgeline during late summer. He doesn't mention the cold in his joints. Or the way some nights he wakes up not from dreams, but from the absence of them. Other times, he tries to describe people. The guards he trains. The cook who hums the same song each morning. The dog that sleeps near the fire but never lets anyone touch it. But his words grow short. Not because he forgets how to write them, but because he wonders, would they even care to know? Would the names mean anything now? He folds the parchment carefully when he finishes. No signature, no address, just words. Quiet, plain, unfinished thoughts meant for someone who may have stopped thinking of him long ago. He stores the letters in a small bundle, tied with string and tucked beneath the corner of his mat. They stay there, pressed flat under years of sleep and silence. He never reads them once they're written. That isn't their purpose. Writing is enough. The act of remembering is enough. There's no anger, no resentment. It's only the soft acceptance that life moves differently beyond the wall. That back in the world he left behind, people marry, children grow, seasons pass. Graves are filled, names are forgotten. Maybe they think he died. It wouldn't be unusual. Many men posted here simply never return. They vanish into snow, into silence, into stone. A year or two of no word, and the world assumes the worst. He wonders, briefly, what they told others, who's drafted, perhaps, sent north. Maybe they held a small ceremony, maybe they didn't. And still, he writes, because in the end, the letters are not about being remembered. They are about remembering. It's about holding on to something that time hasn't fully eroded. A face, a laugh, the smell of steamed buns, the weight of a childhood promise never fulfilled. And maybe, someday, long after he's gone, someone will find them. A bundle of parchment tied with a fading string, and maybe they'll read a few lines. Maybe, just maybe, they'll speak his name aloud, even if only once, even if only in passing. And for a moment, the silence will lift, and the wall will remember that someone once stood here and loved someone far away. The wall is made of stone, yes, bricks, tamped earth, lime mortar, and ancient sweat. But that's only the surface. What rises above the ridgelines is merely the skin of something far older and far stranger. You sense it in the way the wind changes tone between towers. Dynasties built atop dynasties. Some parts were built to keep people out, others to keep people in. Some sections weren't even built for defense. They were meant to impress, to intimidate, to signal to distant eyes. We are here and we endure. And how footsteps echo differently depending on the time of day. Those sections were sometimes abandoned, left half-finished, buried in sand and story. You won't find those on maps. Only in tales passed down from night watchmen and local elders with long memories. Towers built too close together, as if rushed. Watch posts with no line of sight. Etchings so faint they almost disappear under time's weight. Names, symbols, bits of poetry, crude prayers, directions, hidden dates. Not all have been deciphered, not all should be. Gateways that open onto cliffs, tire stretches that veer slightly off course, not because of terrain, but for reasons no one now recalls, but simply so the wall would remember them. A mark, a name, a proof of existence. They weren't generals, weren't scholars, just tired hands and quiet hopes. Were they spiritual, symbolic, simply mistakes lost to time? In the peculiar way, birds refuse to nest in some places, while they flock in others. Something more lives beneath the stones. Not ghosts, exactly, but memory, intention, secrets carved deeper than mortar. To stand upon the wall is to feel its weight not just in height or length, but in meaning. Guards, when rotated, would request certain towers, not for their warmth or their views, but because the wind is quieter there. That's what they'd say. And no one questioned it. The wall was never truly a single wall. It was layers, eras. Archaeologists, those who study the bones of things long buried, have found strange choices in its construction. No records remain to explain them, just brick, just silence. Some villagers generations ago whispered that certain parts of the wall were cursed, that workers died too quickly, that mortar wouldn't set, that tools snapped without reason. Other areas are said to carry blessings, places where strange moss never grows, where the air feels lighter, even in winter. Then there are the messages, scratched into the undersides of bricks, is hidden behind cornerstones. Some guards, it seems, left messages not for others to find. There are stories of symbols placed in sequence along the wall sigils of protection or alignment with stars. Some scholars believe the wall was more than defensive, that it mirrored constellations, that it followed not only the land, but the flow of qi, the energy that ancient Chinese geomancy claims runs through earth like blood through veins. The wall, they say, was a dragon, built to harness the power of the land to channel strength into the empire. And like all dragons, it was feared and revered, not metaphorically, but purposefully. Its path weaves across mountains like a spine, towers like vertebrae. The gates its mouth, its tail curling into forgotten regions. Even the materials mattered. From cold, their bodies, it said, were sometimes buried in the wall itself, entombed behind bricks, beneath walkways, sealed into the foundation, not as cruelty, but as necessity. The work couldn't stop. The wall had to rise. In some regions, stones were chosen not for strength, but for color reddish stones, believed to ward off evil. The immensity, not just of size, but of presence. It's not only a wall, it's a silence with edges. A breath held for centuries. White mortar believed to reflect spiritual purity. Black bricks burned hotter in summer, perhaps symbolically tied to balance in the 5 elements. Or maybe it was just superstition. Scholars speak of lost segments deep in the west places, where local legends recall towers that once sang in the wind, or gates that opened only on certain dates of the lunar calendar. Over time, it became something else. A companion, a confessional, a god. They touched the same stones each morning, whispered into the mortar, laid their tired heads against brick warmed by sun. In the absence of temples, the wall became sacred by use alone. It's hard to tell where archaeology ends and myth begins. But when superstition is followed long enough, it becomes structure. The wall is also a grave. Not officially, not in records, but in reality. Countless builders died during construction, from exhaustion, from illness. Even now, some parts remain unexamined, buried under landslides, lost to sand, swallowed by vegetation. Others swallowed. For those who lived on the wall, the guards, the builders, the forgotten it wasn't just a job. Even today, when tourists walk its restored sections, they feel it, the hush. And for those who stood watch here night after night for the men whose names are dust, but whose footsteps shaped the stone, the wall wasn't merely a structure. It was a world. Some parts of the wall don't make sense. They bend where they shouldn't, veer into hills without strategic purpose, drop suddenly into ravines, and vanish not ending, just dissolving. You could follow one such section for hours only to find that it simply stops. Each name sounds poetic, but each is also a quiet admission. We don't really know why they re there. It's if the builders put down their tools mid-sentence and walked away. There are no explanations in the records, no clear notations in the surviving scrolls. Cartographers of the Ming era sometimes drew clean, ambitious lines across mountain ranges, ideal versions of the wall. A regional governor demanding a portion of the wall be built in his jurisdiction, not for defense, but for prestige. You'd never know they were part of the Great Defense, even when their purpose is unclear. They look more like ancient boundary markers or ruins of forgotten temples. A few local children use them as climbing walls. Sheep walk across them without hesitation. No guards, no glory, no echo of command. An act of vanity carved in stone. The kind of project that continues until the money runs out or the ruler is reassigned or forgotten. But when you visit those places now, what you find are broken fragments. A few stretch toward the desert, only to vanish beneath dunes that shift each year. Occasionally, after a storm or a landslide, pieces reemerge. Curved steps, the edge of a parapet, a single watchtower window peering out from under soil, like a sleeping eye uncovered too soon. Perhaps the builders, aware of local superstitions, adjusted their paths to avoid burial sites or spiritual crossroads. Or perhaps it was simply terrain too steep, too unstable, too unpredictable, and they adapted the way one adapts to the wind. Without elegance, but out of necessity. Disconnected stubs of masonry, standing like lonely teeth along a ridge. Stone declarations rather than fortifications. Like flags planted in silence. Messages not to be read, but felt. Some don't connect to anything. Some curve back on themselves like a question that was never answered. The locals have names for them. Ghost fingers, the serpent turns, the useless teeth. Scholars have speculated for decades. Maybe these strange turns were acts of symbolism. Architectural gestures meant to appease the spirits of the mountains or follow the unseen lines of feng shui. Some believe certain sections were never meant to be part of the main defense line, that they were built to mark territory, not hold it. Other times it was politics. And so, the wall curves and stops. Space and fades into the hillside. Sometimes these segments are covered in moss and pine needles. But for those who notice, who pause their S, something strange in how these bricks still feel purposeful. Some of these whispered passages descend into fog-covered gullies. Others climb into canyons where no invasion ever came. The silence around these places is different, not just empty expectant. The wind moves differently near them, softer. The birds grow quiet. Some guards claim to hear voices near these segments. It's not ghostly, not frightening, indistinct murmurs, like overheard conversations in a room you're not supposed to enter. There's one bend in the wall, near the western hills, where the path splits unexpectedly. One section continues forward, but the other arcs out wide, hugging a cliffside and then dropping into a valley with no known exit. That section isn't on most maps, but it exists. Covered now in grass, half buried by landslides, but unmistakably built. Why? No one knows. One theory suggests it was meant to divert attention, confuse enemy scouts, to draw them away from a more vulnerable stretch. Another theory claims it was part of a ceremonial path used once a year for an imperial ritual that was never written down. Others say it was built by mistake, due to a misread measurement that no one dared correct. Perhaps the most believable explanation is the simplest one, that sometimes walls are built not to keep others out, but to give shape to the unknown. When you walk these odd sections, you feel it, the unevenness beneath your boots. It's the way the angle of the wall seems just slightly off. The way it curves toward nowhere, like the memory of a thought you almost had but lost before it formed. Not beneath stone markers or beneath the shade of pine trees, but inside the mortar, behind the bricks, beneath the surface that now holds the feet of tourists and soldiers alike, by hands that didn't ask why, only how many more, not when so much of it is built on lives. These passages were not built for glory, not for war, perhaps not even for function, but they were built, stone by stone, day by day, and then they were left, swallowed by hills, eroded by wind, remembered only in fragments, and in the strange way your spine tingles when you reach a place where the wall just stops. They say the wall is long over 20,000 li, but its true length cannot be measured in distance alone. Not just lives spent, but lives lost. There is a quiet rumor that runs alongside every brick laid, every stone stacked. Not an official part of the records, but spoken in low tones between workers and guards. that the wall is not just built upon the dead, but with them. It is said that some who perished during construction were buried right there within the wall itself, not in marked graves. It wasn't cruelty, they say. It was a necessity. The wall had to rise. There was no time to transport bodies home. No proper burial rites. The work could not pause for death. And so, when a man collapsed from exhaustion, from fever, from falling stone or frostbite, he was quietly wrapped in cloth, sometimes not even that, and placed where the next layer of bricks would be set. Some builders refused to speak of it. Others claimed they could point to certain sections where the mortar dried differently or where the wall seemed slightly sunken. As they always do in places where silence grows heavy, as they say on moonless nights, the wind carries voices, not screaming, not shouting. It's quiet murmurs, syllables without language, breath without form. Whispers that curl around the towers and slip beneath doors. There, they would whisper, there lies someone. Otherwise, you risk waking his memory and inviting it to walk beside you. Whether true or not, the belief remains and has for centuries. Legends soon followed. Something that would outlast emperors, dynasties, centuries. Your body might disappear, but your presence would remain, carried in the wind, echoed in stone. Of cold spots, even in the heart of summer. But even those who dismiss the tales walk a little faster near certain towers. Light an extra stick of incense when passing the more weathered sections, just in case. Of lantern flames flickering wildly without wind, some say that if you place your ear against the wall and listen, truly can hear a heartbeat. Guards tell of footsteps heard when no one is there. Of course, others scoff. These are stories, they say. Superstition. Folktales born of fatigue and imagination. For those who lived and worked on the wall, the idea of being buried within it was not just a fear, it was a possibility. No bones found, or at least none officially reported. But even that absence feels like part of the mystery. The wall does not easily give up its dead, keeps its secrets as tightly as it keeps its stones. One that added weight to each step. A reminder that this structure demanded not just labor, but life. That to serve it was to risk becoming part of it forever. Some scholars have tried to disprove the rumors. Excavations have been made in a few locations. There is an old superstition among former builders. Never speak a man's name aloud near the wall unless you are certain he has left it. And yet, for all the eeriness these stories carry, there is also something deeply human within them. To be buried in the wall for all its tragedy meant permanence, not anonymity, but inclusion. You became part of something vast. The wall endures not just because of brick and mortar, but because of the hands and bones that hold it up from within. So when the lantern light flickers unexpectedly, or the cold seeps in a little too quickly, or the wind brushes past your ear like a whisper meant only for you, you might remember someone else once stood here. And they may never have left. The wall speaks, though not in the ways we're used to listening. Not in grand inscriptions or proclamations, but in softer, more private marks, carved names in corners, faint poems scratched into shadowed brick, brush-painted messages hidden beneath wooden beams where the sunlight never reached, not because he expected anyone to notice, but because it made his presence feel real. Some left messages like quiet confessions. My mother's soup was better than this. Still watching, still breathing. I miss the plum trees in spring. They weren't intended for history books. They were simply a way to leave something behind. A way to whisper into stone. I existed. The forgotten towers. The wind-beaten parapets, where guards were posted for years, alone with their thoughts, and the sound of boots echoing through stone. A few even attempted poetry, their lines uneven but sincere. This wall will hold when I no longer can. My bones are tired, my hands hollow, but the sky is wide. And I am still here. These weren't made for commanders or the Empire. They were left behind by the guards, the builders. The tired men whose names were never recorded but who still wanted to be known, even if only by the wall itself. One message found behind a tower's collapsed wall, read in simple brushwork. Tell them I tried. That was all. No name. No embellishment. Just the quiet exhaustion of a man doing his best, unseen. Wasn't it uncommon for a soldier to carve a simple character into the side of a stone, his name, hometown, the date of his arrival? Sometimes it was just a sketch, a house, a tree, the face of a child, the curve of a dragon tucked behind a parapet stone. These drawings were small, easy to miss, not crafted for beauty but for memory. For something to hold on to in a place where everything else felt forgotten. Archaeologists working on restoration projects have occasionally uncovered these marks, faint, worn by time, hidden behind bricks or on the undersides of roof beams. Other inscriptions were humorous or crude or deeply personal, a joke about rations, a grumble about a commander, a short line about a lost love. Some stretches of the wall are more densely marked than others, not the grand ceremonial sections visited by officials, but the lonelier outposts. In one of those towers, a poem was found, lightly carved behind a crumbling stairwell. The wind does not remember my name, but I still feel it call. That's the tone of these messages, desperation, but quiet insistence. These men didn't cry out for rescue or recognition. They weren't trying to be famous. They simply wanted to leave a trace, to plant something human in the mortar and brick. Something small enough to be overlooked, but lasting enough to matter. You begin to understand that in a place built to keep people out, these messages were a way of keeping something in. Memory, identity, dignity. A man standing watch. Might never fire an arrow, never see battle, never be remembered in any official way. But with a scratch in the stone, he could say I was here. No parade, no statue, just a faint line, a corner inscription, a name in the dark. But to those steeped in the rhythms of Chinese cosmology, it was something far more alive. The wall wasn't just built on the land, it was built with it. Said that during solstices, shadows from certain battlements align perfectly with the paths of heavenly bodies. Not all of this can be verified, but the belief persists. And belief, in places like this, has a weight heavier than fact. It didn't impose itself upon nature. It followed it, moving in harmony with the contours of mountains, rivers, and sky. Many guards stationed at specific posts brought offerings not to the emperor, but to the land itself. Incense placed in cracks. Pebbles arranged in quiet corners. A ribbon tied to a tree near the wall's edge, fluttering like a prayer in wind. They may not have spoken about dragons aloud, but they felt them in the pulse of stone beneath their boots. In the way certain stretches of the wall seemed to breathe with the hills. And somehow, that was enough. To the untrained eye, the Great Wall is a linear barrier stretched across hills and valleys built to divide and defend. They called it a dragon, not in metaphor but in energy. In the principles of feng shui, dragons are not creatures of fire in myth. They are currents of life ki, the invisible flow that pulses through everything. The wall, winding along mountain ridges and bending with the natural terrain, mirrored the back of a sleeping dragon. The watchtowers became its vertebrae, the gates, its breath, the fortresses, its beating heart. Those who understood this alignment believed that the wall did more than protect the empire from invaders. It stabilized the land itself, controlled the energy that moved through valleys and across plains, balanced the push and pull of natural forces. Where the earth's power surged too strongly, the wall anchored it. A gate placed on the wrong slope could cause misfortune, not just tactically, but spiritually. These were not merely logistical decisions. They were matters of harmony. An old belief that the wall echoes the constellations, that certain towers line up with key stars, forming a celestial mirror across the mountains. The builders, even the most practical among them, were not untouched by this symbolism. Some said the dragon slept peacefully, as long as the wall remained whole, that its energy flowed calmly, sustaining crops, calming tempers, guiding rain. But if the wall were broken, if the towers crumbled and the dragon's back were scarred, chaos would seep in. Not from armies, but from imbalance. From the unseen disorder of a wounded world. Vertebrae in motion, eyes watching the horizon, breath held beneath 1,000 stars. Even today, some elders in nearby villages still refer to the wall as the Earth Dragon. And the stones feel warmer than they should, and the earth seems to hum beneath your feet. They don't speak of it with awe or fear, but with quiet respect, as one might speak of a river that floods when angered, or a mountain that shifts in its sleep. Folk tales wove themselves into the mortar, slipped through the stones, and settled in the shadowed corners of watchtowers. Some were told with a wink around fires. Others were shared only in hushed tones, passed from old soldiers to wide-eyed recruits. These were not imperial stories, not the kind written down, presence that nudges guards awake when their eyelids droop during night watch, a warmth that suddenly rises in the brazier when the cold becomes unbearable, a whisper that alerts them just before a patrol arrives. These spirits, people say, are former sentries who never left. Their loyalty, unbroken even by death, lingers to support the living. A quiet brotherhood that transcends time. But they endured, carried by wind, memory, and superstition, still coiled along the spine of the world. The wall is not just stone. It's his presence. It is memory. It's his alignment made visible. And for those who lived their lives upon the guards, the builders, the old soldiers who paced its spine, perhaps they too became part of the dragon. So when you walk upon it, even now, there are moments when the wind quiets, not just structure, not just defense. Along the endless ridges of the Great Wall, stories traveled like smoke, drifting and never quite the same from one village to the next. Not held by any guard, not swinging with the wind, just gliding. A pale glow, steady and slow, drifting from one tower to the next, long after the last watch change. Some claim it is the spirit of a builder who died before his section was complete, still walking the battlements, checking the work by starlight. Others believe it's a fallen guard, one who froze on duty, whose soul continues its rounds, unwilling to rest until the wall no longer needs watching. One of the most enduring tales is that of the lantern ghost. They say that sometimes on particularly cold nights, a lone light can be seen moving along a remote section of the wall. But not all such tales are grim. Some stories speak of helpful spirits, kind ones. Villagers near certain towers used to leave offerings, large ones, just bowls of rice, small candles, or carved wooden animals to thank these unseen guardians. They believed that doing so brought luck, that it kept storms at bay and bandits away, that it ensured the soldier on duty would return home safely, if not soon, then eventually. There are also tales of lost children, young ones who wandered too close to the wall and disappeared. Some say they were taken by spirits. A commander who ignored the warnings of villagers, and built his post atop a cursed ridge, only to fall ill and speak in riddles until his death. That if you listened carefully on a still night, you might hear messages, not words exactly, but feelings. They still burn incense at ancient gateposts. They still teach their children to bow slightly when passing old towers, not out of fear, but out of respect. For the wall, after all, is not just history. It is presence. It is memory. And in places where the stones have stood longer than empires, who's to say they don't still listen? Warnings, comfort, reminders to stay awake, to breathe slow, to look to the horizon and remember why you're standing where you are. When the hairs on your neck lift without reason, perhaps it's just the cold. Stories like these didn't appear in official logs, but they endured because they explained the unexplainable and offered reason for what reason could not grasp. Others insist the wall swallowed them, as it has swallowed so many things. It was said that if a newlywed placed their hand on a specific stone near Tower 18 of the Eastern Ridge, their marriage would be long and peaceful. Another tower, battered by time and rarely visited, was known among locals as the Healing Wall. Old women would bring their sick grandchildren there and whisper prayers into the cracks, believing the stones remembered ancient remedies. But a few stories offer a softer ending, that the children were not lost, but protected. That the dragon of the wall, ancient and wise, took them into its folds and kept them safe during storms. Returning them when the land had calmed, these children would come back changed, quiet, thoughtful, eyes full of stories they couldn't quite explain. Some towers were believed to grant blessings. There were cautionary tales too, of course. A guard who mocked the spirits and found his boots filled with ice, night after night. Even the sound of the wind earned stories. One belief held that it carried the voices of those who had served on the wall. To this day, locals in far-flung villages near crumbling sections of the wall still leave red ribbons tied to branches. So when the wind rises in the gaps between towers, when a lantern flickers without cause, or perhaps the wall remembers you too. Just beyond the wind-lashed towers and the frost-bitten boots of the outer wall, life softened, if only slightly. Within the more secure inner fortresses of the wall where ranking officers resided, the cold bit less deeply. Heated Kong beds, long hollow platforms of stone or clay warmed by subterranean fire tunnels, ran along the sleeping quarters, letting commanders sleep with toes, uncurled muscles loose, and breath rising in visible wisps only when they stepped beyond their rooms. These weren't just places to issue orders. They were spaces for correspondence, for records, for the slow and constant paperwork that stitched the military world together. In rare cases, a courtyard would be built inside the post, with a small garden or fish pond, half frozen in winter, humming with insects in summer. The presence of family altered the rhythm of the place. Children's laughter echoed down halls built for discipline. The scent of steamed buns and pickled cabbage drifted from kitchens where civilian hands cooked better meals than most soldiers could imagine. These domestic fragments made the fortress feel less like a military post and more like a lonely outpost of comfort, a home fenced in by duty. A commander's days were not spent patrolling the wall, but buried in bamboo slips. A wrong decision could end a career. A careless supply error could lead to starvation at the wall's edge. And failure to detect an ambush, no matter how unlikely, could result in dismissal, disgrace, or worse. The warmth of the Kong bed did not protect against the chill of political missteps. Orders flowed from the imperial court like cold water downhill. A commander might sleep warm, but wake to the uncertainty of a sealed message scroll bearing unfamiliar handwriting, and stamped edicts, balancing rations, logging rotations, calculating tax deliveries. and deciphering orders from Beijing or Nanjing, days or weeks delayed. These officers didn't wake up stiff on straw mats or split their skin opening frozen rations. They woke to warm quilts, slow-burning braziers, and the scent of tea simmering quietly nearby. And the silence was broken now and then by laughter, the scratch of brushes across parchment, or the clink of ceramic teacups. In a world made mostly of stone and silence, even a whisper of seclusion carried weight. Their rooms might be sparse by modern standards, but to a soldier who stood outside with chapped lips and windburned cheeks, they would have seemed nearly royal. These command posts, built with thicker stone, higher ceilings, and more deliberate care, were designed not for enduring hardship, but for overseeing it. The walls were still made of brick, still stained by time and weather, but the air inside was warmer, not only in temperature, but in tone. Paper walls divided their chambers, not thick enough to block all sound, but soft enough to lend a sense of privacy. There were desks, smooth and worn, holding inkstones, brushes, scrolls, the tools of administration, command, and strategy. Some had families with them, wives, children, concubines. Still, comfort did not mean freedom. Commanders were watched too, not by the horizon, but by bureaucrats, reports, shifting alliances. There was ceremony to maintain, uniforms to wear, officials to greet should they visit, rituals before meals, inspections, records to keep that no one may ever read. When snow fell, soldiers trudged through it. Officers watched it from behind thick wooden shutters, sipping tea that hadn't frozen solid in its bowl. Appearances mattered, especially in a system that prized harmony, hierarchy, and quiet control. Those who commanded did so from behind paper and stone. Inside the thicker walls of the fortress, with heated beds and soft lamplight, the rhythm of daily life was. Tea set by drums or marching boots, it was set by the scratch of ink on parchment, the sigh of scrolls being unrolled and the quiet shuffle of records being reviewed again and again. When a shipment of arrows arrived late or not at all, it was logged, followed by a note explaining why, and sometimes an excuse more hopeful than true. Supply caravans didn't always arrive on schedule. Whether bandits or poor planning could all disrupt the fragile network that kept the wall functional. Anticipating these failures, the wise administrator built margins into his requests. He asked for 10,000 bricks, knowing he might receive 6,000 chipped. The wall, that great, winding, endless structure, demanded loyalty from both. The sound of hoofbeats inside the fortress often meant orders from the capital, or at least from a distant governor. Sometimes they brought instructions. Other times they brought inspection dates, audits, or revised maps. Rarely they brought anything good. One gave orders, one endured them. But both in their own quiet way held the line. Those who obeyed did so with their breath misting in the wind and their hands stiff from hours of stillness. Even so, compared to the silent figures outside the guards with no name and no fire life inside the fortress, was a different world. The wall separated not just people from invaders, but people from each other. And yet, each depended on the other. The officer needed eyes on the ridge. The guard needed food from the storeroom. For those in command at the Great Wall, war was often less about weapons and more about writing. There were ledgers to maintain long, careful books tracking every grain of rice issued, every strip of dried meat, every candle burned during night watch. Ink-stained administrators and junior officers worked under flickering lamps, double-checking figures, sealing supply orders, and filing reports that might take weeks to reach the nearest provincial center. These books mattered more than swords. A miscount could lead to a food shortage. Missignature could delay reinforcements. In a place where distance dulled the edge of command, paperwork was the blade. Commanders signed requisitions for firewood, salt, oil, and cloth. Every decision was recorded. Every delivery noted. Messengers arrived periodically, bearing sealed bamboo tubes or folded letters wrapped in silk. Still, there were rituals to soften the days. A small flask of rice wine poured at dusk. A shared meal with junior scribes, not lavish, but warm. A map spread across a table. Wooden markers moved to represent potential threats. Long debate over whether dust on the horizon was windblown or cavalry. Without rice counts and firewood logs, there would be no fuel for stoves, no food for soldiers, no warmth for night watch. The man with the brush was no less vital than the man with the spear. And always, someone recording the discussion, ensuring that even silence had a place in the archives. Pickled vegetables, millet porridge, tea that wasn't cold. They arrived with the kind of rustle that didn't belong, robes too fine for dust, boots too polished for climbing, horses that hadn't learned to wait, nobles, inspectors, messengers of the court. They came not to endure the wall, but to glance at it. Their presence was ceremony, performance in silk and feathered caps, played out on a stage of gray brick. In those moments, the fortress felt less like a military outpost and more like a slow-moving machine humming softly, ink in place of blood, scrolls in place of swords. At the very least, the pounding of hooves and the glint of sun off lacquered saddles. Their gazes scanned the towers, the men, the walls, but not too deeply. They asked questions mostly to be. Soldiers were assembled, uniforms straightened, braziers were relit, tea was warmed, and the dust was swept. If only the top layer. It wasn't about showing truth. It was about showing order. There were strategic meetings too, but they often unfolded like paperwork slowly, with repetition and more theory than action. That every battle was first fought on paper, and that the ink dried long before the first arrow flew. At the wall, this was truer than ever. The real war was one of logistics, and it was won or lost in the quiet rooms behind the fortress gate. Promotions, punishments, supply flows, death counts, all of it recorded. The bureaucracy of empire extended all the way to the edge of its most famous wall. And while guards stared out across endless mountains, command officers stared down at numbers. Their battle was against error. Their enemies were delays, confusion, and miscommunication. And yet this slow grind was essential. Without it, the wall could not hold. It said that the weight of empire wasn't carried on shields but on scrolls. So the next time you picture a general on the Great Wall, imagine him not on horseback, but hunched over a ledger. Not shouting commands, but circling figures. Not holding a sword, but a brush soaked in ink, trying to decide how many boots might be needed for the next season's frost. Because this, too, was part of holding the line. Now and then, like wind sweeping down from the capital, the Great Wall received visitors who stood apart from the stone. Their arrival was unmistakable. Trumpets or gongs sometimes announced them. The noblemen dismounted with practiced care, careful not to dirty their robes. Heard asking them, "How is morale? Are supplies adequate? Any sightings of trouble?" To which the answers were equally practiced, steady, sufficient, nothing of note. These inspections were rarely about discovering problems. They were more about being seen a nod from the empire that it still remembered this distant limb. A show of presence, of hierarchy. The guards knew it. The commanders knew it. Even the noblemen likely knew it, though they played their part all the same. They would stroll along the battlements for a few minutes, commenting on the view, the quality of stonework, the loyalty of the men. To those who lived there, it was a life, a rhythm, a sentence, or a home. and once the visiting robes disappeared behind the gate and the sound of horses faded into wind, the wall returned to what it was before, still, gray watching, just arithmetic. 1,000 guards on paper was a line of defense, but on the wall, it was 1,000 lungs breathing cold air, 1,000 hands gripping stone, 1,000 thoughts of home, none of which made it into the report. The same stones, the same sky. Sometimes they left behind gifts, a bolt of cloth, a sealed letter of praise, a fresh supply of ink, symbolic gestures meant to uplift, but rarely practical. Occasionally, a guard might be recognized for long service, a badge, a few coins, a new pair of boots, one mark for present, another for missing, circle for transfer, a line through a name for the ones who would not return. These weren't personal documents, they were dispatches, tables, tallies, dots on a map that moved or didn't, to those in power far above the wall. The region, even the empire's edge, the men who watched, froze, and waited became abstractions. Not people, but personnel. Something to break the silence, something to talk about for a while. Did you see his hat? That robe must have weighed more than a pack of bricks. He didn't even climb the stairs they carried him. Small remarks, traded over cold tea. It's not bitterness necessarily, just quiet amusement. A reminder of the world that spun far beyond the mountains. But more often the visit ended with little more than polite nods and the sound of retreating hooves. What lingered, however, was the contrast. For the guards who spent years staring at the same ridge day after day, a noble's visit was a ripple in still water. To the noble, the wall was an assignment, a diversion. One more station on a tour of duty or diplomacy, and the guards, without feathers or fanfare, continued their watch, as they always had, as they always would. In the ledgers kept behind warm walls and heavy doors, a soldier's life was not measured in stories, but in strokes of ink. Orders came with numbers. Deploy 200 to Section 13. Rotate 75 south. Reassign 12 to new outpost. No names, just movement. Casualty counts were updated with the same pen used for rice allocations. A dry note at the bottom of a scroll. Losses 3. Cause: exposure. No mention of the man who sang softly on night watch, or the one who carved his family's name into a brick, or the one who hadn't spoken since the storm. Their absence was acknowledged, but not felt, not by those reading the scrolls. This wasn't cruelty, it was distance, necessary detachment in a system that spanned mountains and centuries. To manage an empire, some said, you must look from above. A hesitant correction, a delayed update, footnote that someone added by hand, known to be diligent. Long service. These were not required. Someone chose to write them. Some harbored quiet hopes of rising not to glory, perhaps, but to something a little warmer, a better post, a higher rank, a room with thicker walls. The system moved slowly, if at all, and out on the far stretches of the wall, where scrolls took weeks to travel and attention from the capital was rare, recognition was often delayed into invisibility. Ambition, in the cold, can take odd shapes. It might look like volunteering for extra shifts, memorizing the commander's habits, or saving half a ration to offer as a humble gift. Not out of greed, but out of hunger for meaning, for motion. For proof that a man's station in life didn't have to be permanent. Even within a system of cold countings, flickers of humanity broke through. Quiet resistance, perhaps, or simply the act of remembering that numbers had names. That those dots on the map once stood still in the snow and watched the same stars. You cannot feel the wind through the cracks, or see the frost creeping across a guard's beard. Live stacked like bricks, one atop another. And while most names are forgotten, their presence is not. In the breath that fogged up the cold night, in the boots that paced the same path until the soles gave out, wait in the silence between rotations where one soldier nodded to another and became a statistic. It lingers in the dust, the drafts, the faint warmth of a stone that held a hand too long. You cannot pause on one man's suffering or you'll lose the shape of the whole. And yet, within the scrolls, traces remained. In the end, the wall was not just a structure of stone, but of people, layered over years, so the ledgers remain, preserved in archives, neat, clean, official. But the truth lies outside them in the space between the numbers. But not to the wall remembers. Not every man who stood on the wall was content to stay there. There were paths, of course, official ones, merit-based advancement, recommendations, commendations for discipline or bravery, but they were narrow and rarely used. Still, some tried. A guard might offer to carry messages in the worst weather, or track suspicious movement with greater diligence than required. He might study calligraphy at night by dim lantern light, hoping to impress his superior with neat handwriting. A few even sought favor through gifts: a jar of preserved plums sent from home, a carved wooden charm, a rare bottle of rice wine acquired through quiet trade. These gestures were rarely rejected, but rarely rewarded. Others turned to more direct means, slipping coins into the right hands, offering silence in exchange for advancement, promising loyalty that bent with the wind. It was a delicate dance. It was too obvious and it backfired, too subtle and it was missed entirely. And yet somewhere deep within them, a small part still stirred. Not loudly, not every day, but just enough to remember. I tried. Even then, the result was often modest. A change in patrol route, a less windy post, an extra blanket in winter. Even broken hope still mattered. The young man who once imagined himself becoming a quartermaster, perhaps even a lieutenant, now simply hoped for a dry bed and a kind look from the cook. Time reshaped ambition into resignation. Not bitter, just quiet. It's the kind of silence that settles in the chest and stays there. Enough to notice, not enough to change a life. A commendation following a border skirmish, but even then, the gains were modest. A higher bunk, a warmer coat, a few more decisions to make. And even these men, having climbed, found themselves still beneath the same sky, still surrounded by stone and wind. For most, nothing changed at all. Years passed, dreams faded. That in a world built to hold men in place, someone had dared, however briefly, to move. Once in a while, someone did rise. A promotion granted after a supply crisis handled well. For those who didn't rise, which was most, life continued as before. One watch followed another. Hills remained hills. The wall never changed. And in some quiet way, perhaps that was enough. Not because it succeeded, but because it meant they hadn't been entirely still. The wall, after all, was made of more than brick and stone. It was made of hope, even if no one noticed. Now, the stones fall quiet again. The wind that once brushed cold against weathered cheeks still moves through the same mountain passes, soft, steady, unchanged. The fire's long gone out, but the wall remains. Not just the stone, but the silence. The rhythm of footfalls long past. The breath held during long night watches. The letters never sent. The hopes quietly buried under years of frost and duty. It curls over the watchtowers, slips between the mortar lines, and hums low across the brick like the echo of a name once spoken. Now long forgotten, in the cracks where moss grows, in the slight dips in the steps where thousands of heels once struck. in the whisper of wind through tower windows that haven't held glass in centuries. And somewhere on the edge of sleep, you may hear it breathe. It's not loudly, just enough, because the world you know still stands on the quiet watch of forgotten men, by quiet acts of endurance that held the edges of a vast world in place. One cold morning, one dull patrol, one whispered joke at a time. The men are gone, the boots have worn through, the spears are rusted, and the wall, that endless, winding serpent of stone, still stands, held together not just by mortar, but by memory. You can still feel them if you listen closely. They were not generals, not poets, not names etched into gold. They were just men, standing where they were told, watching where no one else looked, waiting. Their lives were not marked by glory, but by repetition, by stillness. And now, they rest. The stars they stared at still shine above. The hills they watched still roll away into the mist. Sleep now. Let the stories drift into silence. Let the hills fade into shadow. The wall is still there.